The words, "Speak now or forever hold your peace," had just left Reverend Matthew's lips when everything went to hell. I sat in the third pew of St. Augustine Cathedral, watching my son Michael stand tall in his grandfather's tuxedo. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across white roses and ivory silk. The bride, Sarah, looked radiant in her grandmother's lace veil. Perfect. Everything was absolutely perfect. Until it wasn't. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he unfolded a legal document that had no business being at a wedding altar. "I'm sorry," he announced to the hushed congregation, "but I'm legally obligated to read this court injunction before proceeding." My blood turned to ice. "By this document," he began, his voice carrying across the cathedral like a death sentence, "you stand to inherit approximately $53 million from the estate of Robert Charles Patterson, deceased." $53 million. The number hung in the air like incense smoke, heavy, suffocating, impossible to ignore. I watched my son's face drain of color. His mouth fell open. Sarah's bouquet of white peonies slipped from her trembling fingers, petals scattering across marble steps like fallen snow. "By this document, you stand to inherit," Reverend Matthews repeated, his voice stronger now, "approximately $53 million. The cathedral erupted in whispers. 300 guests suddenly became a jury, their collective gasp echoing off vaulted ceilings. Someone's phone buzzed. A baby started crying. I pressed my gloved hand to my chest, feeling my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. The pearls at my throat felt tight, too tight. Sarah's father shot to his feet in the front row. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking like a whip. My son Michael stood frozen at the altar. 28 years old, successful architect, devoted fiancé, and he had no idea. No idea about the trust funds, the offshore accounts, the investments that had been growing in his name for decades. He had no idea his dead father was about to destroy his wedding day. "Mother?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried. Everyone heard it. Everyone turned to look at me. 300 pairs of eyes, all waiting for answers I couldn't give. Not here, not now, not like this. Sarah's eyes found mine across the cathedral, beautiful brown eyes that had welcomed me as family, now filling with tears of confusion and terror. She was 25, a kindergarten teacher who drove a Honda Civic and bought her wedding dress at David's Bridal. She'd fallen in love with a man she thought made $60,000 a year as an architect, not a multimillionaire heir. "I object to this interruption," Sarah's father called out, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "This is..." "Sadly, I'm sorry, Thomas. The court order is clear. All parties must be informed before any legal proceedings can continue." "Legal proceedings? What legal proceedings?" The document in his hands seemed to glow under the cathedral lights. I could see Robert's lawyer's letterhead from where I sat, Hartwell and Associates, the same firm that had been managing my late husband's affairs for 37 years, the same firm I'd trusted to keep his secrets buried. "By this document," Reverend Matthews read for the third time, "you stand to inherit approximately $53 million, contingent upon full disclosure to your spouse prior to marriage." Full disclosure. 2 words that could save my son's inheritance and destroy his marriage. Because Sarah's family didn't know. Nobody knew except me and a handful of lawyers bound by confidentiality agreements. We'd lived like a middle-class family for 28 years while Robert quietly built an empire in the shadows. I watched sweat bead on Michael's forehead, watched Sarah's veil tremble as her shoulders shook, watched 300 wedding guests transform from celebrants into spectators at a family catastrophe. The cathedral's organ music had stopped. Even the baby had gone quiet. The only sound was my own pulse pounding in my ears and the rustle of Reverend Matthews folding the court document. "I need a moment," Michael finally managed, his voice hoarse. I need to speak with the family." But which family? His bride's family sitting in shock in the front row? Or me, the mother who'd kept this secret for nearly 3 decades? Sarah's father was already on his feet, his face red with rage. $53 million, he hissed. And nobody thought to mention this before today? Sarah looked at me with such betrayal in her eyes that I felt my heart crack. This girl, who'd called me mom for 2 years, who'd asked for my blessing, who'd trusted me to be part of her family. I'd failed her. I'd failed them both. The weight of 30 years of secrets pressed down on my chest like a gravestone. Every family dinner where I'd watched them budget carefully, every time Sarah had clipped coupons or Michael had worried about student loans, every moment I'd sat silent while they planned a modest life together, never knowing they could afford anything they wanted. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking beneath my navy dress. 300 faces turned toward me again, waiting for explanations I didn't know how to give. How do you tell your son that his father was worth $53 million? How do you explain that you've watched him struggle financially for years while sitting on information that could have changed everything? How do you admit that love sometimes looks like lies when you're trying to protect the people you care about most? The stained glass windows cast colored shadows across my hands as I gripped the pew in front of me. Red for anger, blue for sorrow. Been hidden in plain sight. Michael's eyes met mine across the cathedral. In them I saw confusion, betrayal, and a question that would haunt me for years to come. Did you know? Of course I knew. I'd known everything. That moment, standing in God's house with my son's broken trust and his bride's shattered faith, propelled me back through decades of carefully constructed lies and well-intentioned deceptions. Back to the beginning of a story I'd never wanted to tell. I'm sitting here now, 3 years later, in my quiet living room as the sun sets behind the oak trees. The light is soft and forgiving, nothing like those harsh cathedral spotlights that exposed everything that day. I want to look you in the eye and tell you something important. If you've ever felt the rug pulled out from under you by someone you trusted, you're not alone. If you've ever discovered that the person you loved most was living a double life, keeping secrets that changed everything you thought you knew about your family, you're not alone. If you've ever been the secret keeper yourself, watching people you care about make decisions based on information you're withholding, wondering if you're protecting them or betraying them, God knows you are not alone. I see you in the comments sometimes, the woman who discovered her husband's second family, the man who found out his parents weren't really his parents, the daughter who learned her modest grandmother died with millions in the bank. Family secrets, they're everywhere, aren't they? We tell ourselves we're protecting the ones we love. We convince ourselves that some truths are too heavy, too complicated, too dangerous to share. We become guardians of information that was never ours to guard. But here's what I learned standing in that cathedral, watching my son's wedding day implode. Secrets don't protect people, they imprison them. Now, I know some of you are watching this because you're dealing with your own family revelations. Maybe you're the one who discovered the secret. Maybe you're the one who's been keeping it. Either way, this story is for you. If what I'm sharing resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in this mess of good intentions and hidden truths, I want you to hit that subscribe button. Not for me, but for all of us, because we're building something here. A community of people who understand that families are complicated, that love sometimes wears the mask of deception, and that healing requires courage. Subscribe to our community of truth-tellers, people who've learned the hard way that transparency, even when it's painful, is the foundation of genuine relationships. I'm going to tell you everything, how the secrets started, how they grew, how they nearly destroyed the people I was trying to protect, and most importantly, how I finally found the courage to choose truth over comfort. This isn't going to be easy to hear. It certainly wasn't easy to live through. There were moments when I questioned everything. My judgment, my motives, my understanding of what it means to be a good mother and wife. You have permission to feel angry as you listen. Permission to recognize your own secrets and lies in my story. Permission to grieve for the relationships that might have been different if honesty had been the foundation instead of an afterthought. But I also want you to feel hope, because that's what this story is really about. Hope that it's never too late to choose transparency. Hope that families can survive even devastating revelations. Hope that love is stronger than secrets, but only when we're brave enough to let it be. By the end of this story, you'll understand something I wish I'd known 40 years ago: the difference between protecting someone and controlling their story. You'll learn how timing can make the difference between a revelation that heals and one that destroys. You'll see how honesty, even when it comes late, can still preserve love and legacy. This journey changed everything for me. It cost me some relationships and deepened others. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself and the choices I'd made in the name of love. But it also gave me something precious: the peace that comes with living transparently, the relief of not carrying other people's secrets, the joy of relationships built on truth instead of careful omissions. The woman sitting in that cathedral pew 3 years ago thought she was protecting her family by staying silent. She was wrong about a lot of things, but to understand how wrong and why those mistakes nearly cost us everything, I need to take you back to where it all began. Back to when I first learned that the man I'd married for love was also a man who lived by secrets. Back to when I made the choice that would define the next 30 years of our lives. Let me take you back to 1987, when I was 45 years old and thought I understood my life completely. Robert had been dead for 6 months. 6 months of learning to sleep alone in our queen-sized bed, of opening condolence cards that still arrived sporadically, of figuring out how to be a widow instead of a wife. I was sitting in his study, our study now, I supposed, surrounded by banker's boxes and manila folders, trying to make sense of what he'd left behind. As a paralegal, I knew how to organize legal documents, but as his wife of 23 years, I was discovering I'd known almost nothing about his business affairs. Robert Patterson, entrepreneur, father, husband, mystery. The house felt too quiet without his presence. No more sounds of him shuffling through papers late at night. No more coffee brewing at 5 a.m. before he left for meetings I wasn't invited to attend. No more of those little handwritten notes he'd leave on my pillow. "You look beautiful when you sleep. Love, R." That employed 12 people and generated what I'd assumed was a comfortable middle-class income. We lived carefully. Our joint checking account held exactly $2,500 every month for household expenses. Groceries, utilities, Michael's school clothes. I clipped coupons religiously. We drove used cars. Vacations meant camping at state parks or staying with relatives. Robert always said we were building for the future, saving for Michael's college fund, planning for retirement, being responsible. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? The first crack in that belief came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was organizing his desk drawer when my fingers found a slip of paper tucked between old business cards. Cayman International Bank. Account balance? $1,247,890. I stared at those numbers until they blurred, read them again, counted the zeros twice. My hands started shaking. We'd been eating generic cereal for breakfast. I'd been buying Michael's school supplies at dollar stores. 3 weeks earlier, I'd sold my mother's engagement ring, the only thing of value I'd inherited, to pay for his baseball cleats. And my husband had over $1 million in an offshore account I knew nothing about. I confronted him that evening, waited until Michael was asleep, then sat across from Robert at our kitchen table with the bank slip between us. "What is this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Robert looked at the paper for a long moment, then at me. His eyes were tired, sad, but not surprised. "Security," he said quietly. "It's for our security." "Our security? Robert, we're struggling to pay for groceries while you have over $1 million hidden away." "Not hidden. Protected. He reached across the table and took my hand. "Elaine, my business is unpredictable. Clients come and go. If something happened to the company tomorrow, this ensures Michael gets to go to college. This ensures you're taken care of." His thumb traced circles on my palm, the same gesture that had comforted me through morning sickness, late-night feedings, the everyday stresses of raising a family. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Because I didn't want you to worry about it. You handle everything else so beautifully. The house, Michael, keeping us organized and happy. I wanted to handle the financial security. Let you focus on the family." It sounded reasonable, protective even. A husband shouldering the burden of financial planning so his wife could concentrate on what mattered most. "But I sold my mother's ring," I said, tears starting to flow. "I sold the only thing I had left of her for $87 to buy baseball equipment." Pain flashed across Robert's face. "I'm sorry. I should have thought. I should have made sure you had access to more household money." "That's not the point, Robert. The point is, we made that decision together. We sat at this table and talked about Michael's sports expenses and how to afford them. We decided together to sacrifice something precious because we thought we had no choice." "I didn't want you to feel trapped by money decisions," he said softly. "I wanted our marriage to be about love, not finances." I looked at this man I'd shared a bed with for over 2 decades. His gentle brown eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair, the wedding ring that matched mine, worn thin from years of wearing it. He meant well. I could see it in every line of his face, but meaning well wasn't the same as being honest. "Promise me," I said finally. "No more financial surprises. We're partners, Robert. Partners share information." "I promise," he said, kissing my hand. "No more secrets." I believed him. Again. Looking back now, I can see how that moment set the pattern for everything that followed. My willingness to accept his explanations, his belief that protection looked like privacy, both of us confusing secrecy with security. The offshore account became our family's first shared secret. We increased the household budget to $3,500 a month. I stopped clipping coupons quite so religiously. Michael got new baseball cleats without anyone having to sell family heirlooms. And I told myself this was what marriage looked like: trust, division of responsibilities, one partner handling money while the other handled everything else. Robert continued leaving those sweet notes on my pillow. He surprised me with weekend trips to bed and breakfasts. He remembered our anniversary with thoughtful gifts, never expensive but always meaningful. He was a good husband in every way except one. He couldn't seem to stop keeping financial secrets, but I didn't know that yet. That March evening, sitting at our kitchen table holding hands over a bank slip that represented more money than I'd ever seen, I thought we'd solved our trust problem. I thought that one conversation had opened all the doors between us. I was wrong about that, too. Those early doubts I'd pushed aside, that uneasy feeling that there was more Robert wasn't telling me, they were just the beginning of a pattern that would define our marriage for the next decade. A pattern that would eventually put me in a cathedral watching my son's wedding day crumble under the weight of secrets I'd helped keep. The years after that kitchen table conversation blurred together in a haze of family dinners and financial juggling acts I didn't know I was performing alone. We started eating at nicer restaurants. Nothing extravagant, just the local steakhouse instead of Denny's, wine with dinner instead of water. Robert would smile across candlelit tables and say, "We can afford this now. We should enjoy life a little." But somehow we were always just barely affording it. When Michael graduated from Ohio State in 1995, he came home with dreams of backpacking through Europe before starting his architecture career. The trip would cost $8,000. Flights, hostels, rail passes, spending money for 3 months abroad. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," he said over Sunday dinner, his eyes bright with possibility. "I'll never be this free again." Robert and I exchanged glances across our dining room table. $8,000 might as well have been $80,000 based on our household budget. "Let me look at the numbers," Robert said carefully. "See what we can do." 2 weeks later, he came home with bad news. "The business has been slower this quarter," he explained. "I just can't make it work right now." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about my son's disappointed face, thinking about the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity slipping away, thinking about that Cayman Islands account with over $1 million. But Robert had explained that money was untouchable, long-term investments, retirement security, not for day-to-day expenses, even important ones. So I made a decision without telling him. I liquidated my small pension account from my paralegal job, took out a personal loan against our house, borrowed money from my sister, scraped together $40,000, enough for Michael's trip plus a safety cushion. "How did you manage this?" Robert asked when I told him. "I found a way," I said simply. Mothers always find a way. The pride in his eyes felt worth every sleepless night I'd spend over the next 2 years paying off that debt. Michael's postcards from Prague, Barcelona, and Amsterdam covered our refrigerator like colorful bandages over my financial wounds. His joy made the sacrifice meaningful, or so I told myself. By 1999, when Michael announced his engagement to his college girlfriend Jennifer, the pattern was firmly established. Big family expenses came out of my resourcefulness, not Robert's mysterious accounts. The wedding venue alone cost $25,000, a historic mansion with gardens and a gazebo where Jennifer had dreamed of getting married since childhood. "It's her special day," I told Robert when he hesitated over the price. "We'll make it work." And we did. I worked overtime for 8 months, took on weekend freelance projects, sold my grandmother's china set and my father's coin collection. Every family heirloom became funding for my son's happiness. Robert contributed what he could from our regular budget, but somehow there never seemed to be extra money, despite his business doing well. New clients, bigger contracts, success that should have translated into financial breathing room, but it didn't. Not for us, anyway. The wedding gifts were another $15,000, crystal stemware, silver serving pieces, a down payment on their first apartment. I maxed out credit cards and called it an investment in their future. My hair started going gray around this time, not gradually, but in silver streaks that appeared seemingly overnight. My doctor said it was stress, but I couldn't identify any particular stressor, just a general weight I carried everywhere. Sleepless nights became routine. I'd lie in bed calculating and recalculating expenses, moving numbers around in my head like puzzle pieces that never quite fit together. 3 a.m. mathematics sessions where I tried to figure out how families with 6-figure incomes always seemed to be struggling financially. But I pushed those doubts aside. We were building something beautiful, a close family, a successful son, memories that would last forever. The red flags were there, though, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Robert's desk drawer had acquired a lock sometime in 1997. When I asked about it, he said it contained sensitive client information, confidentiality requirements. "Of course," I'd said. "I understand." His phone started buzzing with encrypted messages, late-night calls that sent him to his study with the door closed. When I asked, he'd say it was international clients in different time zones. "Business never sleeps," he'd explain, with that familiar, apologetic smile. The safe deposit box key disappeared from our kitchen drawer. When I mentioned it, Robert said he'd moved our important documents to a more secure location. "Everything's taken care of," he assured me. "You don't need to worry about it." I wasn't worrying. I was working extra hours to pay for wedding flowers while my husband managed investments I wasn't allowed to see. By 2001, when Jennifer and Michael divorced after 2 years of marriage, I'd spent nearly $80,000 on a wedding for a marriage that didn't survive. Robert comforted me by saying we'd given them a beautiful beginning. "Sometimes that's all we can do," he said, holding me while I cried over the failed marriage and the mounting credit card debt. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover until after his death, was that during those same years, Robert's offshore accounts had grown from $1 million to over $6 million. $5 million of growth while I was selling family treasures to fund family celebrations. His business wasn't just successful, it was generating enormous profits that were disappearing into accounts I didn't know existed. But I couldn't see the pattern then. All I saw was a husband who loved our family but struggled with the practical realities of middle-class life. A good man doing his best in challenging circumstances. The sleepless nights were becoming more frequent. The gray hair was spreading. My back ached from the stress I carried in my shoulders like invisible weight. Still, I told myself this was what marriage looked like. Partnership, sacrifice, one person handling the emotional labor while the other handled the financial planning. I had no idea I was funding our family life with my resources while he was building a secret fortune with his. That revelation wouldn't come until a cold February night in 2002, when insomnia drove me to his study, and I stumbled across something that would change everything I thought I knew about the man I'd married. It was 2:47 a.m. on a February night when my world tilted off its axis. I'd been lying awake for hours, my mind churning through our tax preparation documents. Something wasn't adding up. Robert's reported business income didn't match the lifestyle we were somehow maintaining, even with my financial acrobatics. Unable to sleep, I padded downstairs to his study in my bathrobe and slippers. The house felt different at night, full of shadows and secrets. His laptop sat open on the mahogany desk, still warm. He'd been working late again, those mysterious client calls that stretched past midnight. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally. I just needed to find our homeowner's insurance policy for the tax accountant. Robert had said it was filed digitally now, more secure than paper copies. The desktop screen showed multiple folders with names I didn't recognize. RC Holdings, Patterson Enterprises International, Cayman Structures, LLC. My heart started beating faster. I clicked on a file labeled Legacy Fund Confidential. The spreadsheet that opened made my hands shake so violently I could barely control the mouse. Row after row of numbers, dates, account balances, investment summaries. $2.1 million in 1998, $3.7 million in 1998-1999, $5.8 million in 2000, $8.3 million in 2001. The years I'd been selling family heirlooms and working overtime to fund our son's life milestones, but it got worse. Much worse. Another tab labeled Annual Transfers. $500,000 moved to offshore accounts every year, like clockwork, like breathing. Money that could have paid for Michael's college tuition 4 times over. Money that could have funded 3 weddings without me taking out a single loan. Money that had been sitting there, growing, while I'd been graying and stressing and sacrificing pieces of my family's history. I scrolled down further, found projections, goals, target, $50 million by 2025. $50 million. I sat back in Robert's leather chair, my mind reeling. We were living paycheck to paycheck, while my husband was quietly building a fortune that would make us multimillionaires. Number. That would make him a multimillionaire. These accounts were in his name only. I opened my journal, the same leather-bound book where I'd been documenting our family's financial struggles for years. Page after page of careful budgeting, worried calculations, plans to make ends meet. All lies. All unnecessary. My pen trembled as I wrote, "Hidden wealth poisons trust." The words looked stark on the cream-colored paper. True, undeniable. Everything I've sacrificed was a performance. Every sleepless night was theater. Every family treasure I sold was a prop in his elaborate deception. The guilt that had lived in my chest for years, guilt over not work overtime, watched me sell my grandmother's china, watched me take out loans and max out credit cards, while sitting on millions. I kept writing, the truth pouring out like poison from a wound. This isn't protection. This is control. This isn't security planning. This is financial abuse disguised as love. My hand was moving faster now, years of suppressed understanding flowing through my pen. I enabled this. Every time I accepted his explanation about business being slow, I gave him permission to lie. Every time I found another way to fund our family's needs, I made it easier for him to hoard his wealth. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Secrecy enabled his entitlement. My sacrifice enabled his greed. I'd been so focused on being the good wife, the resourceful mother, the family problem solver, that I'd never questioned why the problems existed in the first place. Family harmony cannot thrive on lies. That sentence felt like my thesis statement, the conclusion to 15 years of research I hadn't realized I was conducting. All those family dinners at nice restaurants where Robert smiled and said we could afford this now. We could have afforded 5-star dining every night. All those conversations about Michael's college expenses. We could have sent him to Harvard without blinking. All those careful budget discussions and financial planning sessions. Pure theater. The legacy he's building isn't wealth, it's deception, and I've been his unwitting accomplice. The desk lamp cast harsh shadows across the financial documents spread before me, evidence of a double life I'd been too trusting to see. But I was seeing it now. All of it. True legacy isn't hidden fortune, it's honest relationship. It's trust that doesn't require passwords and locked drawers and offshore accounts. I looked around Robert's study, our study, with new eyes. The locked filing cabinets, the encrypted computer files, the safe I wasn't allowed to open. This wasn't a home office. It was a fortress designed to keep secrets from the person who was supposed to be his closest partner. No more, I whispered to the empty room. Armed with this devastating clarity, I knew what I had to do next. I had to map every hidden account, every secret investment, every lie I'd been living with for over a decade. I had to document the full scope of what Robert had been hiding from me, and from our son. Because if there was this much money, if there were this many secrets, then Michael deserved to know what his inheritance would really be, and I deserved to understand exactly how thoroughly I'd been betrayed by the man I'd trusted with my life. The next 3 weeks became an archaeological dig through 15 years of financial deception. I converted our dining room into a war room. Stacks of bank statements covered the mahogany table where we'd shared family meals. Spreadsheets lined the walls like evidence in a murder investigation, because that's what this felt. Like the murder of trust. I started with what I'd found on Robert's laptop and worked backward through every hidden file, every encrypted folder, every password-protected document I could crack. The scale of it staggered me. Annual trust deposits, $2.3 million in 1995. $2.8 million in 1995. 1996, $3.1 million in 1997. By 2001, he was moving $4.2 million per year into offshore accounts, per year, while I was clipping coupons. I created my own spreadsheet, The Truth About Robert's Money. 4 columns: year, disclosed income, hidden deposits, family expenses paid by Elaine. The pattern was sickeningly clear. 1995, disclosed income $89,000. Hidden deposits $2.3 million. My contribution to family expenses $12,000 from pension fund liquidation. 1996, disclosed income $94,000. Hidden deposits $2.8 million. My contribution $8,500 from freelance work. 1997, disclosed income $98,000. Hidden deposits $3.1 million. My contribution $15,000 from selling grandmother's china. Every year, the same story. Robert's business was supposedly doing okay while secretly generating millions. I was stretching every dollar while he was banking more money than most people see in a lifetime. The manipulation quotes were documented in emails I'd never been shown. Communications with his financial advisors that painted a devastating picture of calculated deception. "Don't worry about Elaine's concerns," he'd written to his banker in 1998. "She's focused on day-to-day family needs. I handle the big picture planning. It's better this way." Better for who? "Trust me," he'd told me repeatedly when I'd questioned our finances. "This is all for your future. For Michael's future. Everything I do is for the family. Trust him." Those 2 words had been my undoing. Another email, this one from 1999. My wife doesn't need to know about the full portfolio. She's happier managing the household budget. Some information is too complex for non-business people to understand. Too complex. Like I was a child who couldn't handle grown-up information. The most devastating discovery came in a folder labeled Michael's Education Planning. I'd expected to find college fund information. Instead, I found a $500,000 trust established in Michael's name when he was 18. Money that could have paid for his entire undergraduate education, graduate school, and probably a house. Money that was growing in accounts he didn't know existed while I was taking out loans for his baseball equipment. Robert had literally set aside $500,000 for our son's future, then watched me stress about affording his present needs. The cruelest part? Michael had learned to live within artificial constraints. He'd developed a scarcity mindset because enabled that ignorance. Every time I'd praised his frugality, every time I'd agreed that money doesn't grow on trees, I'd reinforced lessons that were fundamentally dishonest. My son had inherited his father's wealth, but not the knowledge that it existed. The documentation filled 3 binders by the time I was finished. Trust agreements, investment summaries, offshore banking records, communication with financial advisors I'd never heard of. Robert's secret empire employed 7 people. Accountants, lawyers, investment managers, all paid to maintain a fortune I wasn't supposed to know about. The final tally made me physically ill. $47.3 million in total assets as of February 2002. $47 million. We'd been multimillionaires since 1997, living like we were barely middle class. I sat in our dining room, surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate lie I'd ever encountered. My marriage had been built on a foundation of financial fraud so sophisticated it required a team of professionals to maintain. But the worst part wasn't the money itself, it was the enabling. Every time I'd accepted Robert's explanations about business being unpredictable, I'd made it easier for him to maintain the charade. Every time I'd found creative solutions to our artificial financial problems, I'd removed his incentive to be honest. I'd been so proud of my resourcefulness, my ability to make things work despite limited resources, my skill at stretching dollars and finding creative funding solutions. I'd been enabling the biggest lie of my life. Michael had learned to be financially responsible because I'd taught him we couldn't afford extravagance. He'd developed excellent money management skills to cope with scarcity that didn't exist. In trying to protect him from feeling entitled to wealth he didn't know about, Robert had created artificial struggles that shaped our son's entire relationship with money. And I'd been complicit in every lesson. The dining room felt like a courthouse where I was simultaneously judge, jury, and defendant. The evidence was overwhelming. The very verdict was clear. My marriage was a lie. My financial sacrifices were unnecessary. My son's careful budgeting was based on false information. 15 years of my life had been performance art, with Robert as director and me as the unknowing lead actress. The weight of this knowledge should have crushed me. Instead, it filled me with determination. This deception had to end, not just for me, but for Michael. He deserved to know the truth about his inheritance, about his father's wealth, about the artificial constraints he'd been raised to accept. But I had no idea how completely that truth would upend his life until I watched it explode at his wedding rehearsal dinner, when someone else knew more about our family's finances than the family itself. The rehearsal dinner was held at Brookside Country Club, all crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths that reminded me of Robert's funeral. Reception 3 years earlier. I should have known it would be the night everything unraveled. Michael looked handsome in his navy suit, his arm around Sarah as they moved between tables greeting guests. Sarah's family had flown in from California. Her parents, 2 sisters, and an army of cousins I was still trying to remember. I was nursing a glass of wine at the family table when I heard Thomas Brennan's voice carrying across the room like a foghorn. Sarah's father, a corporate attorney who'd made partner at 35 and never let anyone forget it. "Seen the estate documents," he was saying to a cluster of men near the bar. $53 million in trust funds. Can you believe that kid doesn't even know? My wineglass froze halfway to my lips. 53 million. 6 million more than I'd discovered in Robert's files. The mother's been keeping it quiet, Thomas continued, his voice loud with whiskey confidence. Smart woman. Protecting the inheritance until he's mature enough to handle it. I set my glass down with shaking hands. How did Thomas Brennan know more about my late husband's estate than I did? Course, that much money needs professional management, he went on. I've already offered to help structure some tax-advantaged investments. Family rate, naturally. Family rate. He was planning to profit from managing money my son didn't know he had. Michael's laughter drifted across the room. He was telling some story to Sarah's cousins, his face bright with joy, completely oblivious to the fact that his future father-in-law was discussing his inheritance like a business opportunity. My chest tightened. This was wrong on every level. Elaine? A gentle hand touched my shoulder. You look like you've seen a ghost. I turned to find Lydia Richardson, my college roommate and one of the few people who'd known Robert before his business took off. She'd flown in from Seattle for the wedding, one of those friendships that picks up seamlessly after years apart. I need some air, I managed. Lydia didn't ask questions. She simply took my elbow and guided me toward the terrace doors, past clusters of guests who were discussing everything except the financial bombshell being dropped 20 feet away. The evening air was cool against my flushed cheeks. String lights twinkled overhead, casting romantic shadows across empty tables set up for later in the evening. What happened in there? Lydia asked, her voice gentle but concerned. I couldn't speak. Couldn't explain that I'd just discovered my family's financial situation was public knowledge, while remaining secret from the family itself. Honey, you're white as a sheet, she pressed. Is it about Robert? About the money he left behind? Even Lydia knew. Even my college roommate, who lived 3,000 miles away, had more information about my husband's estate than I'd possessed until 3 weeks ago. How much do you know? I whispered. About the trust funds? The offshore accounts? Lydia's face was kind but worried. Robert mentioned some of it when you two visited us in '98. I assumed you were handling all the estate planning together. He never told me, I said, the words scraping my throat raw. Not about the full amount. Not about Michael's inheritance. I've been figuring it out piece by piece since he died. Lydia's expression shifted to horror. Oh, Elaine. Oh, no. Thomas Brennan in there knows more about my son's financial future than my son does. He's already positioning himself to manage money that Michael doesn't know exists. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. My husband built a $53 million fortune and told everyone except his own family. Now strangers are making plans for our inheritance while we're still processing that it exists. Lydia pulled me into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry. I thought you knew everything. I thought you were just being private about it. Private, I laughed bitterly. Robert's been dead for 3 years. I've been living on his life insurance and my paralegal salary, thinking we were financially stable but not wealthy. Meanwhile, there's enough money sitting in accounts I can't access to buy this entire country club. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do about a secret that was apparently only secret from the people it affected most? I don't know, I admitted. If I tell Michael now, it ruins his wedding. Sarah's family is already treating this marriage like a business merger. Can you imagine what they'll do if they know the real numbers? But if you don't tell him, then he marries into a family that sees him as a financial opportunity while he's still clipping coupons and worrying about student loan payments. Through the terrace windows, I could see Michael spinning Sarah on the dance floor. They looked so happy, so innocent, so completely unprepared for the reality that money changes everything, especially when it comes as a surprise. There's something else, Lydia said quietly. Something you should know before tomorrow. My stomach dropped. What? Thomas has been asking questions about probate timelines, about when Michael gains full access to the inheritance. He's not just offering to help manage the money, Elaine. He's researching exactly when it becomes available. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just a father-in-law looking out for his new son-in-law's interests. This was a lawyer who'd done his homework and saw an opportunity. He knows more about the timeline than I do, I realized. He's probably seen documents I haven't found yet. What documents could he have access to that you don't? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Standing there on that terrace, watching my son dance with his bride while her father planned to profit from secrets Robert had kept, I felt something crystallize inside me. This ended tomorrow. One way or another, the lies stopped at that altar. In the solitude of that moment, with Lydia's steadying presence beside me, I awakened to my duty as Michael's mother, to protect him from the financial predators circling our family's wealth, even if it meant destroying the illusion of his simple, honest life. I found myself alone in the bridal suite at midnight, surrounded by white roses and wedding dreams that felt increasingly fragile. Sarah had gone home hours ago, exhausted from greeting relatives and managing last-minute details. The room still smelled like her perfume, something light and hopeful that reminded me of springtime. I sat in the velvet armchair by the window, still in my navy dress from the rehearsal dinner, staring at the wedding gown hanging on the closet door, layers of silk and lace that represented everything pure and honest about love, everything my marriage hadn't been. The contrast hit me like a physical blow. Tomorrow, my son would stand at an altar and promise transparency, fidelity, and partnership to a woman whose father was already planning to exploit the fortune Michael didn't know he had. The cycle was repeating itself. Secrets breeding more secrets. Financial deception masquerading as protection. I couldn't let it happen again. My phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. "Are you okay? Saw you leave early. Call if you need to talk." Even she understood something was fundamentally wrong. Lydia, who lived across the country and saw us once every few years, had recognized the crisis while I'd been living inside it for decades. "I am his guardian, not his jailer," I whispered to the empty room. The words felt revolutionary. For 30 years, I'd confused protecting Michael with controlling his story. I'd let Robert convince me that love looked like secrecy, that caring meant making decisions for people without their input. But guardianship wasn't about keeping someone ignorant. It was about giving them the tools they needed to protect themselves. And Michael needed to know what he was walking into tomorrow. Tears started flowing then. Not the gentle tears of wedding eve sentiment, but the harsh sobs of a woman finally admitting she'd been complicit in her own deception. I grieved for the marriage I'd thought I had, the partnership that was really a performance, the man I'd trusted who'd spent 30 years treating me like a child who couldn't handle adult information. Robert's face floated before me in the dim light. Those gentle brown eyes I'd trusted so completely, the smile that had reassured me every time I'd questioned our finances. "It's for your security," he'd said about that first offshore account. "You don't need to worry about it," he'd said about the locked desk drawer. "Trust me," he'd said 1,000 times while building a fortune I wasn't allowed to know about. I'd believed him because I'd wanted to believe him, because questioning him would have meant acknowledging that the foundation of our life together was quicksand. But staying silent hadn't protected anyone. It had just delayed the reckoning. Now Thomas Brennan knew more about my son's inheritance than my son did. Now financial predators were circling our family's wealth, while the family remained ignorant of the danger. The pattern had to stop. Here, tonight, with me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos from tonight's dinner. Michael's radiant smile, Sarah's joy as she showed off her engagement ring, the two of them cutting the rehearsal cake together, feeding each other bites while their families applauded. They looked so young, so trusting, so unprepared for the reality that $53 million changes everything. Relationships, family dynamics, the very nature of love itself. But hiding that reality from them wasn't kindness. It was cruelty disguised as protection. Michael deserved to know that his fiancé's father had already researched his inheritance timeline. Sarah deserved to know that her family's financial assumptions about this marriage were based on information her future husband didn't possess. They both deserved the chance to make informed decisions about their future, even if those decisions broke my heart. I thought about Lydia's steady presence tonight, the way she'd recognized my distress without needing explanation, the way she'd offered support without judgment. That was what healthy relationships looked like: mutual awareness, shared burdens, truth offered with compassion. Not the elaborate deception Robert had constructed in the name of love. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the country club's gardens. Tomorrow, those gardens would be filled with wedding guests expecting to celebrate a young couple's new beginning. Instead, they might witness the explosive end of our family's 30-year foundation of lies. But better an honest explosion than a dishonest marriage. Better painful truth than comfortable deception. Michael was strong enough to handle this. He'd have to be, because the alternative, letting him walk blindly into a marriage where one family knew more about his inheritance than he did, was unthinkable. I was done being complicit in other people's secrets, done enabling financial deception, done confusing silence with loyalty. "I am his guardian, not his jailer," I repeated, the words gaining strength each time I said them. A guardian's job was to prepare someone for the world, not shield them from it. To give them truth, not comfortable lies. To trust them with difficult information instead of treating them like children who couldn't handle reality. Robert had failed at that job spectacularly. He'd treated both Michael and me like we were too fragile for honesty, too simple for financial complexity, too naive for the full truth about our own lives. Tomorrow, that failure ended with me. The resolve that crystallized in that bridal suite, surrounded by symbols of honest love, would carry me through the hardest conversation of my life. The letter that would finally set my family free from the prison of well-intentioned lies. I drove home at 12:43 a.m. and went straight to Robert's study. No more tiptoeing around locked drawers, no more respecting passwords I wasn't supposed to know, no more treating our shared life like his private fortress. I had work to do. I sat at his mahogany desk with my laptop, a stack of legal documents, and the silver pocket watch Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. The watch he'd bought with secret money, while I'd been debating whether we could afford new tires for the Honda. The irony wasn't lost on me. "My dearest Michael and Sarah," I began typing, then deleted it. Too gentle, too apologetic. "Michael and Sarah," I started again. "There are things you need to know before you say your vows tomorrow. Better, direct, honest." The letter poured out of me like confession. 3 years of suppressed truth finally finding its voice. "Your father built a $53 million fortune during our marriage. He kept this wealth secret from both of us, allowing me to struggle financially while he accumulated assets I didn't know existed. I documented everything: the offshore accounts, the trust funds, the annual deposits that dwarfed our household income, the investments that had been growing in Michael's name since he was 18. I discovered a $500,000 education trust established for you when you turned 18. This money could have paid for your entire college education and graduate school. Instead, I took out loans and worked overtime while your inheritance grew untouched in accounts you weren't told about." My fingers moved faster as the scope of Robert's deception took shape on the page. "The business struggles your father cited whenever we needed money for family expenses were fabrications. His company was generating millions in annual profit. Every sacrifice I made, selling my mother's ring, liquidating my pension, working weekends, was unnecessary theater in a performance I didn't know I was giving. I printed out bank statements, trust documents, investment summaries. Every piece of evidence that proved our family's financial reality bore no resemblance to the story we'd been living. Sarah, your father has seen these documents. He knows about the inheritance and has already offered to manage it. He's researched the probate timeline and knows exactly when Michael gains access to these funds. You both deserve to know what family members outside our immediate circle already understand." The hardest part came next, the personal betrayal that cut deeper than financial deception. I enabled this secrecy by trusting explanations that didn't add up. Every time I accepted your father's assurances about business being unpredictable, I made it easier for him to maintain the charade. I failed you both by not asking harder questions, by not demanding transparency, by confusing love with willful blindness. I paused, looking at the silver pocket watch sitting beside my laptop.
Robert had presented it to me over dinner at our favorite restaurant, the same place where he'd proposed 23 years earlier. "Time is precious," he'd said, fastening the delicate chain around my wrist. "I want you to always remember how much our time together means to me." Beautiful words, purchased with hidden money while I was rationing grocery expenses. The watch had become a symbol of our marriage, elegant on the surface, complicated underneath, representing time that wasn't as simple as it appeared. I picked up the watch, feeling its weight in my palm. Such a small thing to carry so much meaning. "I'm including the silver pocket watch your father gave me for our anniversary," I added to the letter. "It represents something I need to return to both of you. Time. Time to make informed decisions about your future. Time to understand what you're really inheriting. Time your father stole from us with his secrecy." I wrapped the watch in tissue paper, sealing away 25 years of marriage in a small velvet pouch. My truth is free. My silence is not. The words appeared on screen before I'd consciously decided to type them, but they felt absolutely right. Revolutionary. Final. I will no longer be complicit in keeping financial secrets from the people they affect most. You deserve to enter this marriage with complete information about what you're inheriting, both the wealth and the deception that created it. I printed the letter on good stationery, signed it with the same fountain pen I'd used to pay bills Robert could have covered with pocket change. Then came the legal documents, copies of the will's confidential pages, trust agreements, investment summaries, bank statements from accounts I'd only discovered 3 weeks earlier, everything Thomas Brennan had seen, everything Lydia had known, everything that had been hidden from the people it belonged to. I assembled it all in a large manila envelope, letter, documents, and the silver watch that no longer represented love to me. At 4:17 a.m., I drove to the 24-hour FedEx office downtown, paid extra for Saturday delivery, signature required, with tracking confirmation. The clerk looked curious about the early morning urgency, but didn't ask questions. "Important documents?" she ventured. "Life-changing ones," I replied, echoing words I'd spoken years earlier about a different kind of truth. I watched her attach the tracking label and place my envelope in the outgoing bin. 30 years of secrets reduced to 2 pounds of paper and metal, scheduled for delivery in 6 hours. Driving home through empty streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. Not happiness exactly, but relief. The bone-deep exhaustion that comes after finally putting down a weight you'd been carrying too long. My phone would start ringing soon. There would be anger, accusations, desperate attempts to put the secrets back in their bid box. But I was done carrying other people's lies, done enabling financial deception, done protecting people from information that belonged to them. My truth was free, finally, completely free, and their responses would test every boundary I'd just drawn. The package was delivered at 10:23 a.m., exactly 4 hours before the wedding ceremony. My phone started ringing at 10:31 a.m. Michael first, then Sarah, then both calling simultaneously while text messages flooded in like angry waves. I turned off my phone and made coffee. When I turned it back on an hour later, I had 27 missed calls and a group text thread that looked like a digital war zone. Michael: "What the hell is this?" Sarah: "You ruined everything, our wedding day." Michael: "Mom, how could you do this to us today?" Sarah: "My family is asking questions I can't answer." Michael: "You destroyed our wedding. Are you happy now?" Sarah: "This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life." Michael: "Why didn't you tell me before? Why today?" The messages kept coming, rapid-fire panic disguised as rage. I read them all with the detached fascination of a scientist observing predictable reactions. Their first instinct wasn't gratitude for the truth. It wasn't concern about being deceived for years. It wasn't even curiosity about the inheritance they'd just discovered. It was anger that I'd disrupted their comfortable ignorance. I typed one response: "We can discuss this calmly after you've had time to process the information. I'm available to talk between 6 and 8 p.m. today. The wedding is your decision to make with complete information." The phone rang immediately. I didn't answer. Sarah:
You can't just drop a bomb like this and then ignore us. Michael, answer your phone right now. Sarah, my dad is going crazy. He wants to know how long you've known. Michael, this is insane. You're acting insane. Sarah, we need to talk about this face to face. Michael, the guests are already asking questions. Guilt phase, right on schedule. I waited until 6 p.m. exactly, then answered Michael's call. Mom, this is unforgivable, he started without preamble. Good evening, Michael. Have you had a chance to read through the documents? Don't act like this is a business meeting. You destroyed our wedding day. I gave you information about your inheritance. What you do with that information is your choice. But why today? Why couldn't you wait until after the honeymoon? Because Sarah's father already knew. Because he was planning to manage money you didn't know you had. Because keeping secrets from you was wrong, regardless of timing. Silence. Then, we could have worked this out privately. Like your father worked things out privately for 30 years? That's different. How? More silence. Sarah's voice came on the line. Mrs. Patterson, we're not ready for this. The wedding is in 2 hours. Can't we just pretend this never happened and deal with it next week? You can absolutely pretend it. Never happened, I said calmly. That's your choice, but I won't pretend anymore. So you're going to let everyone know about the money? Michael's voice was rising again. I'm not going to tell anyone anything, but I'm also not going to lie if asked direct questions. You're holding us hostage, Sarah accused. I'm setting you free. There's a difference. The bargaining phase came next. Phone calls throughout the afternoon from various family members offering to mediate the situation. Sarah's mother, can't we just keep this quiet until after the ceremony? Michael's best man, dude, your mom is really screwing up your day. Even Lydia called. Honey, are you sure about the timing? The timing was never going to be right, I told her. There's never a perfect moment to admit 30 years of lies. By evening, they'd moved to desperate measures. Michael showed up at my door at 8:47 p.m., still in his wedding tuxedo. Please, he said through the screen, just tell me this was all a mistake. That you found old documents or something. It's not between 6 and 8 p.m., I replied. Mom, come on. I'm your son. You are my son, which is why you deserve the truth. He stood there for 15 minutes, alternating between pleading and arguing with my closed door. I sat in my kitchen, drinking tea, listening to him cycle through every manipulation tactic Robert had perfected. Finally, he left. The pattern was becoming clear. Every boundary I set was immediately tested. Every calm response triggered escalation. Every refusal to engage on their terms strengthened my resolve. I started documenting everything, screenshots of texts, notes about phone calls, times and dates of attempted visits. Not because I planned to use the evidence against them, but because I needed proof of my own strength. Each boundary held, each manipulation attempt failed. Each test of my resolve proved I was capable of change. For 30 years, I'd been trained to prioritize other people's comfort over truth, to smooth over conflicts rather than address root causes, to enable secrets rather than demand transparency. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that real love requires honesty, even when honesty is inconvenient. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Family members, friends, wedding vendors, everyone wanted me to fix the situation by taking back the truth. But I was done fixing other people's problems with my silence, which meant I needed to fortify my life with changes that went beyond words. The manipulation attempts convinced me that words weren't enough. I needed structural changes, legal barriers, financial transparency, physical distance from the chaos I'd unleashed. Real boundaries require real enforcement. Monday morning found me in the conference room at Hartwell and Associates, sitting across from James Hartwell himself. The same lawyer who'd helped Robert Patterson, he said carefully, I understand you want to make some changes to the trust structure. Radical changes, I corrected, starting with full transparency. James shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. The privacy protections your husband established were quite sophisticated. Unwinding them will be complex. Then we'll make it simple. I want quarterly reports sent to all beneficiaries. I want co-trustees who aren't family members. I want every account, every investment, every dollar documented and disclosed. That goes against everything Robert intended. Robert intended to deceive his family for 30 years. I'm correcting that intention. I slid my own legal documents across the mahogany table. I've drafted amendments to every trust agreement. Review them with your team and let me know what additional steps are needed for implementation. James's eyebrows rose as he scanned my work. You've been thorough. I had 30 years to learn what transparency looks like by seeing its opposite. The amendments were comprehensive. Lydia would serve as co-trustee alongside my lawyer, Margaret Chen, two women who had no financial interest in the inheritance and every reason to protect Michael's interests honestly. Quarterly reporting requirements, annual beneficiary meetings, complete disclosure of all investments, expenses, and distributions. No more secrets. No more offshore mysteries. No more locked drawers and encrypted files. I'm also updating all emergency contacts, I told James. Michael is removed as my primary contact. Lydia becomes my healthcare proxy and estate executor. That's quite a shift, James observed. My son has proven he's not ready for those responsibilities. He prioritizes comfort over truth. Emergency decisions require people who can handle difficult information. From the law firm, I drove to First National Bank for the second major restructuring of my financial life. I need to establish an independent trust account, I told Maria Santos, the same loan officer who'd watched me struggle with artificial budget constraints for years. What kind of trust structure are you looking for? Complete transparency. Quarterly statements sent to multiple parties. No single person with sole access. Think of it as the opposite of my late husband's approach. Maria's expression suggested she understood exactly what I meant. The new account would hold my portion of Robert's estate, money I'd only recently learned existed. Every transaction would be documented. Every distribution would be reported. Every decision would be made in consultation with trustees who valued honesty over secrecy. I want a paper trail for everything, I emphasized. No private meetings, no verbal agreements, no handshake deals. If it's not documented, it doesn't happen. By Wednesday, I'd made the final major change. I put our family home on the market and signed a lease on a cottage by Mirror Lake, 40 minutes outside the city. The cottage was everything our suburban house wasn't. Small instead of sprawling, simple instead of sophisticated, honest instead of impressive. Auburn shutters, framed windows that looked out over water instead of neighbors. A wraparound porch invited morning coffee and evening reflection. 2 bedrooms, 1 office, 1 life-sized space for a life-sized person. No grand dining room for family dinners built on lies. No master suite shared with someone who kept secrets. No study with locked drawers full of financial deception. Just clean, clear space for clean, clear living. Lydia flew in from Seattle to help with the move, along with Margaret Chen and 3 women from my paralegal networking group. Women who'd built careers on accuracy, documentation, and truth-telling. "This place suits you," Margaret said, arranging law books on simple wooden shelves. "It feels honest." "That's the point," I replied, hanging curtains that let in light instead of blocking it out. The support system that emerged around the cottage surprised me. Not family members trying to manage the crisis, but chosen family who understood why the crisis was necessary. Lydia, of course, but also Margaret's legal circle. Women who'd built practices on transparency and ethical representation. Women who understood that some secrets destroy more than they protect. We had potluck dinners where everyone contributed something real. Food, conversation, support that didn't come with conditions or manipulation. The final structural change came the following month. I established the Robert Patterson Youth Education Endowment, seeded with $2 million from the inheritance I'd only recently discovered. "I want this money to benefit young people who understand the value of education," I told the Community Foundation director. "Students who don't take opportunity for granted because they've had to work for it." The endowment would provide scholarships for first-generation college students, Kids who understood that education was a privilege, not an entitlement. Young people who would appreciate transparency because they'd grown up with honest struggles. Your husband would be proud, the director said during the signing ceremony. My husband would be horrified, I corrected. Which is exactly why this is the right thing to do. By December, my new life had structure. Legal protections that prioritized transparency. Financial systems that required documentation. Living space that reflected clarity instead of concealment. Support networks built on honesty instead of enabling. I'd constructed a fortress of accountability, protected by people who valued truth over comfort. The cottage felt like sanctuary. Mornings by the lake with coffee and legal journals, evenings on the porch with books and honest conversation. A life scaled to actual needs instead of artificial performance. Michael and Sarah had been calling during agreed hours, their manipulation attempts growing more sophisticated as they realized the changes weren't temporary. But they hadn't seen me face to face since the wedding day explosion. That was about to change. Saturday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I looked through the window to see Michael and Sarah standing on my cottage porch, their faces serious and determined. Time for the real test of everything I'd built. "We need to talk," Michael said through my screen door, his voice carrying the weight of 6 months of avoided conversations. "Not here," I replied, grabbing my keys. "Neutral territory, Giuseppe's, 1 hour." I wasn't about to let them into my sanctuary. This conversation needed the structure of public space and the memory of better times. Giuseppe's had been our family restaurant for 20 years, the place where we'd celebrated Michael's graduation, his first job, his engagement. Red checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic bread, memories layered like sediment in every corner booth. I chose the private dining room in the back, away from curious eyes and familiar faces. They arrived together, a united front against their unreasonable mother-in-law. Michael looked tired. 6 months of managing an inheritance he'd never expected while navigating a marriage built on financial revelations. Sarah wore the expression of someone who'd married into a family drama she hadn't signed up for. "Mom," Michael began as they sat across from me, "this has to stop." I poured water from the pitcher on the table and waited. "You can't keep punishing us for Dad's decisions," Sarah added, her voice strained. "We didn't know about the money either." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said calmly. "I'm creating transparency." "By making everything a legal battle?" Michael's hands were clenched on the red tablecloth. "By turning our inheritance into some kind of public document?" "By ensuring you always know what you're inheriting, both the wealth and the responsibility that comes with it. But the co-trustees, the quarterly reports, the oversight committees, it's like you don't trust us." I set down my water glass with deliberate precision. "My truth is free," I said, meeting both their eyes. "My silence is not." The words hung between us like a bridge neither of them wanted to cross. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sarah asked. "It means I will no longer be complicit in keeping secrets from the people they affect most. It means I will always choose transparency over comfort. It means the days of financial deception ended with your father's death." "But we're not Dad," Michael protested, his voice cracking. "We wouldn't hide things from you." "You spent 6 months trying to convince me to hide things from yourselves. To go back to the old system of private accounts and secret meetings." They exchanged glances. He was right, of course. "That's different," Sarah said quickly. "We just wanted time to process everything privately. That's normal." Private processing became permanent concealment in my marriage. I won't watch that. Pattern repeat. Michael leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "Mom, we're sorry about the wedding day, about how we reacted. We were shocked, okay? We said things we didn't mean. You said exactly what you meant. You were angry that I disrupted your comfortable ignorance." "That's not fair," Sarah interjected. "Finding out about $53 million on your wedding day would shock anyone. Finding out your spouse's family had researched your inheritance timeline without telling you should have been more shocking." Silence settled over the table like dust. "Look," Michael said, switching tactics, "we've learned our lesson. We'll be more transparent. We'll include you in financial decisions. Just please, lift some of these restrictions. the co-trustees, the quarterly meetings. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing to whom? To us, to Sarah's family. Everyone thinks you don't trust us to manage our own money. Everyone is correct. The bluntness of it stopped their protests cold. You've had 6 months to prove you could handle transparency, I continued. Instead, you've spent that time trying to recreate your father's system of private control. Every conversation we've had has been about limiting disclosure, not embracing it. We just want some privacy, Sarah said, tears starting to form. Some control over our own lives. Privacy and secrecy aren't the same thing. Control and deception aren't the same thing. Your father taught me that lesson the hard way. I pulled out the folder I'd brought with me. Documents outlining the new trust structure, complete with flowcharts and timelines. These are the new rules, I said, spreading papers across the checkered tablecloth. Quarterly statements to all parties. Annual beneficiary meetings. Co-trustee approval for major distributions. Complete transparency in all financial decisions. And if we don't agree, Michael asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Then you forfeit your role in managing the trust. Lydia and Margaret will handle everything according to the legal requirements I've established. You'd really cut us out? Sarah whispered. I'd really protect the inheritance from people who want to manage it in secret. Michael's face was flushing red. This is blackmail. This is accountability, something your father never taught either of us. I stood up, leaving the documents on the table between us. The new structure is not negotiable, I said, gathering my purse. It's not a starting point for bargaining. It's not subject to modification based on your comfort level. Mom, wait, Michael started to rise. I love you both, I said, my voice steady despite the crack in my heart. But I love honesty more, finally. I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. There will be no renegotiation. The words echoed in the private dining room as I left them sitting with the wreckage of their assumptions and the blueprint of their new reality. For the first time in 6 months, I'd put truth before relationship comfort, and it felt like coming home to myself. 2 years later, I wake at dawn by choice, not crisis. My mornings begin with stillness by the lake, watching mist rise off the water while coffee steams in my favorite ceramic mug, the one Michael made in high school pottery class, back when our family's biggest secret was surprise birthday parties. The cottage feels sacred in those quiet hours. Sunlight streams through windows that face east, toward possibility instead of west, toward regret. No more heavy drapes blocking truth. No more shadows hiding what should be illuminated. After meditation, 10 minutes of breathing without agenda, I settle into my study with legal journals and correspondence from the endowment. My real work happens here, in this simple room lined with books about transparency law and ethical estate management. The Robert Patterson Youth Education Endowment has funded 37 students in 2 years, scholarship recipients who send thank you notes with proper grammar and genuine gratitude, young people who understand that opportunity is a gift, not an entitlement. Last week, Maria Santos, the first scholarship recipient, no relation to my former banker, sent photos from her college graduation. First in her family to earn a degree, now accepted to law school with plans to specialize in estate transparency advocacy. You gave me more than tuition money, she wrote. You gave me the chance to build something honest. When did my sons ever thank me like that? I don't dwell on that question anymore, not from bitterness, but acceptance. My afternoons belong to the Youth Education Center now. 3 days a week, I mentor high school students applying for college scholarships, teaching them to write essays that reveal character instead of concealing struggle. Don't make your life sound perfect, I tell them during our Wednesday writing workshops. Perfect stories are boring. Authentic stories are powerful. These kids understand that wisdom instinctively. They've grown up with real challenges, not artificial ones. They know the difference between struggle that builds character and struggle that's performed for sympathy. Yesterday, Marcus, a 17-year-old whose mother works 3 jobs, read his essay about learning responsibility when his father left. Raw honesty, no self-pity, just truth about growing up fast and choosing integrity over anger. That's a scholarship-winning essay, I told him afterward. Really? It doesn't sound too sad? It sounds real. Real always wins over polished. Lessons I wish I'd taught my own son. Tuesday evenings belong to chosen family now. Lydia flies in once a month from Seattle. Margaret Chen brings wine and updates on the legal reforms we're advocating. 3 other women from my paralegal network contribute homemade meals and honest conversation. We gather around my cottage's simple dining table. No grand mahogany, no family heirlooms, no symbolic weight, just pine wood and honest friendship. Last Tuesday, we celebrated Margaret's promotion to partner at her law firm. She'd turned down the position twice before, worried about work-life balance. This time, she accepted because her firm agreed to implement transparent billing practices she'd been advocating. "You inspired me to demand better," she told us over dessert. "Watching you rebuild your life around honesty gave me permission to do the same." Growth. Real growth happening in real time. These women show up consistently, not just for celebrations, but for ordinary moments that matter. When I had the flu last month, Lydia rearranged her Seattle schedule to stay for a week. Margaret brought soup and legal briefs so I could work from bed without falling behind. Support that flows both ways. Love that includes accountability. Friendship based on who we are, not what we provide. The silver pocket watch found its proper home 6 months ago. I'd been carrying it in my jewelry box, unsure what to do with the symbol of Robert's deceptive generosity. Then Lydia brought her granddaughter Emma to visit during spring break. 16 years old, working part-time to save for college, already applying for scholarships based on merit rather than need. "This belongs to someone who values time honestly," I said, placing the watch in Emma's palm during our last dinner together. Emma's eyes widened. "Mrs. Patterson, this is beautiful, but I couldn't—" "You can and you will. Because you represent what this watch was always supposed to symbolize. Time shared openly. Moments that aren't hidden or hoarded or kept secret from people who matter." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. She understood the significance. Emma has sent 3 thank you notes since returning to Seattle. Updates on her scholarship applications, her part-time job, her plans for college. Real communication about real life. She wears the watch to school every day, she tells me. A reminder that time is precious and should never be wasted on deception. The changes in my daily life reflect deeper transformation. My medicine cabinet holds vitamins instead of anxiety medications. My calendar has spontaneous spaces, time for unexpected coffee dates or afternoon walks around the lake. My bank account grows predictably because transparency eliminated the chaos of crisis management. Michael and Sarah have settled into the new trust structure, though our relationship remains carefully cordial. They attend quarterly meetings, ask appropriate questions, follow the documentation requirements. Professional interaction rather than personal intimacy. Progress, but not the kind I'd once hoped for. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it's the beginning of something authentic. Maybe it's not. Either way, I'm no longer waiting for their transformation to live fully. I've learned to love them without needing them, to support their success without enabling their secrecy, to care about their well-being without sacrificing my own truth. My worth doesn't depend on their approval. My happiness doesn't require their participation. My future doesn't hinge on their forgiveness. This is what freedom feels like. Not the absence of family complications, but the presence of authentic relationships built on mutual respect and shared honesty. The cottage by Mirror Lake has become more than my home. It's proof that life can be rebuilt on foundations of transparency, that chosen family can be stronger than inherited obligation, that legacy is about character rather than capital. I want to look you in the eye one more time and tell you something important about serenity. People think peace means having your family close, your secrets safe, and your wealth protected from judgment. That's not serenity. That's control disguised as harmony. Real serenity is the peace of honest legacy. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your life can bear scrutiny. It's the deep breath you take when you realize you don't have to remember which version of the truth you told to whom. I sit here now, 4 years after that cathedral altar crisis, in the golden hour light of my cottage study, and I feel more peaceful than I have in decades. Not because my family finally understands what they put me through, though some healing has happened. Not because everyone approves of my choices, though some do. I feel peaceful because I finally understand that love without transparency isn't love at all. It's transaction disguised as relationship. You deserve transparency as much as you deserve love. Actually, you can't have sustainable love without transparency. I spent 30 years proving that truth the hard way. Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me when Robert first showed me that offshore account slip. Someone should have whispered, "Question this. Dig deeper. Don't let anyone, even someone you love, make financial decisions about your shared life without your full knowledge and consent." Someone should have said, "Hidden assets corrode trust faster than revealed debts. Secrets always cost more than honesty, even when honesty is expensive." But nobody told me that, so I'm telling you now. Family wealth that's kept secret from family isn't protection, it's manipulation. Financial privacy that extends to spouses and children isn't prudent, it's abusive. Love that requires ignorance to survive isn't love worth preserving. I see you in the comments sometimes. The woman whose husband had 3 credit cards she never knew about. The man whose parents died owning property he'd never heard of. The daughter who discovered her struggling mother had been hoarding money while asking for financial help. I see you, and I want you to know, demanding financial transparency doesn't make you controlling. Setting boundaries around deception doesn't make you difficult. Refusing to enable secrets doesn't make you disloyal, it makes you wise. You don't have to wait for a wedding day explosion to choose truth. You don't have to discover hidden millions to demand honesty. You don't have to sacrifice your peace to protect someone else's comfortable lies. You can start today, right now, with one brave conversation. Maybe it's, "I need to see all our account statements." Maybe it's, "I want to understand our complete financial picture." Maybe it's, "I will no longer accept 'trust me' as an explanation for decisions that affect my future." Start somewhere. Start anywhere. But start. Because here's what I learned that I want you to understand. People who truly love you will welcome your questions. They might be uncomfortable initially. Change always is. But they'll adjust. They'll grow. They'll learn to value your partnership more, not less, when you insist on being a full partner. And people who can't tolerate your need for transparency, who rage and manipulate and guilt trip when you ask direct questions, those people don't love you. They love what your ignorance allows them to do. There's a profound difference. Real love invites scrutiny. Real love shares burdens. Real love shows up with honesty, especially when honesty is inconvenient. The Youth Education Center where I mentor is full of young people learning this lesson early. Students who ask hard questions about college financing, teenagers who demand clarity about family expectations, young adults who refuse to accept "because I said so" as explanation for major life decisions. They're building relationships on foundations of mutual respect and shared information. They understand that questions are acts of care, not attacks on authority. I want that for you, too. I want you to discover what it feels like to love and be loved transparently, to make decisions based on complete information, to build relationships that can survive the light of scrutiny. I want you to know the peace of sleeping soundly because you're not carrying anyone else's secrets, the joy of conversations that don't require careful omissions, the confidence that comes from knowing your relationships are built on truth instead of convenient fictions. You do deserve that. Your need for honesty matters. Your questions have value. Your future should be based on facts, not carefully constructed stories designed to manage your expectations. Don't wait 30 years to figure that out like I did. In the comments below, I want you to tell me, what secret are you ready to courageously reveal? What question have you been afraid to ask? What boundary around transparency are you ready to establish? Share your story. Others need to hear it. Your courage might be the permission someone else needs to choose truth over comfort. And if you see someone sharing their struggle with family secrets or financial deception, encourage them. We're building something powerful here. A community of people who understand that honesty isn't always kind, but it's always kinder than deception in the long run. Some, Those of you are watching this years after I lived it, when the crisis has passed and the lessons have been learned. But your story is still being written. Your boundaries are still being formed. Your transformation toward transparency is still possible. It's never too late to choose truth, to demand reciprocal honesty, to stop enabling other people's comfortable lies at the expense of your own peace. 4 years ago, I stood in a cathedral watching my son's wedding implode under the weight of secrets I'd helped maintain. I thought I was witnessing the destruction of our family. Today, I realize I was witnessing its rebirth. The real family, the one built on truth instead of tradition, transparency instead of transaction, mutual respect instead of managed ignorance. Your real family is waiting for you too, in the courage to ask hard questions, in the boundary you set tomorrow, in the choice to love authentically instead of conveniently. The cottage by Mirror Lake has taught me that legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about how honestly you lived while you were here. What legacy of truth are you ready to create? The rest of your authentic life is waiting for your answer.